Greetings, folks. We're from Bigfatphoenix Interactive. We build video games that help kids develop social and emotional skills and critical life skills. Our first game is called Fairside Stories. We're available right now for free on the Google Play Store, and we will be available shortly on iOS. Do try the games and give us your feedback. Hey folks, welcome to the very first episode of the Bigfatphoenix podcast, where we discuss and talk about the intersection between games and learning. In today's episode, we're going to look at how can we use video games to build positive behaviors and influence positive attitudes in children. I'm Anand. I'm one of the co-founders of Bigfatphoenix Interactive. I do a bunch of game design, a bunch of administration, and a bunch of things like organizing podcasts in which we talk about all of this stuff. I have with me today my colleagues Projjal, Pavithra, and Bhavna. And why don't you guys just introduce yourselves and give me some time to take a breather?
Sure. Hi, I'm Projjal. I am a designer and programmer. I'm generally responsible for actually bringing all the ideas everyone else comes up with to life.
Hey, I'm Pavithra. I do game design and player experience. So all the cool stuff which you see in the game are all my thoughts.
Hi, I'm Bhavna and I handle product and a little bit of game design at Bigfatphoenix Interactive.
That's it. You do a lot more.
Do I?
I don't know. That's what I would believe.
I handle product design and a lot more at Bigfatphoenix Interactive.
Much better, much better. Start by talking about, the narrative, right? The narrative that video games are bad for you, or video games are bad for kids, video games make children violent. We've heard that all the time. So what are the experiences? I mean, each of you, have you come across this narrative? And in your personal experience, where have you come across this narrative, and what has that meant to you? I mean, if we can just kind of go around the room once and talk about it.
Okay, I'll go first.
Sure.
I actually grew up not playing video games because that narrative had a very deep presence in my family. The behaviors was a little different for me and my brother. My brother was allowed to play whatever video games he wanted to, and I wasn't. I think a lot of it came from a place where my parents didn't have any experience with video games, and the ones that they were looking at, they felt like they were violent, but for some reason they thought it was not okay for me to be exposed to that kind of I'll say those kinds of experiences. That didn't stop them, however, from letting me watch, movies, TV shows, or read books that had inherent violence in them, which was a little strange to me. I think also formed part of the arguments that I would have with them on a regular basis.
Like Krishna tearing that king into two, or chopping somebody's head off.
Yeah, or you just
Sudarshan
read
Chakra.
books. Exactly, right? You read books about good winning over evil, but that having to follow a path of violence. Some books did have that. And I was at a slightly advanced reading level, so it's not like I was reading books that were only okayed for 13-year-olds or 10-year-olds or whatever. I was reading books at a much higher level. And those were not censored as much for me. And I found that a little weird. So I also felt really left out of the experience that my friends were having because a lot of them were playing video games. And that was a sad beginning to my exposure to video games, though. Yeah.
Pavitra, I mean, especially as a kid and as a parent, you have a young child, so you might be getting that perspective from different angles and at different points in your life. So you want to talk about that narrative and how it's played a part in your life.
Yeah, right now to say I would say my son is lucky because he has a game designer mom and a gamer dad who doesn't stop him from playing any games. But I very clearly remember Karthik, my husband, telling stories that he always wanted to play games, and he used to go to PlayStation and play games where he was prohibited from playing games or stopped from playing games because that was not a productive use of his time, his parents felt. But now with thoughts and with people changing and them seeing an active career, like me doing an active career in games and all that, today, I introduced my son to a game, and I should say that he had like a lot of fun. He is just 5 years old and he plays like a bunch of games, and I can actively see him reflecting that to his cousin or to his friends, or like when he knows that failure is not a constant thing. So when there are like kids, when there is another kid whom he is playing with, and if she's upset about losing a game, I see him encouraging her, telling that don't worry, it's just a game, you can just hit the replay button and play it again, which is a very strong behavior I like visually see now impacting kids at this very little age, right? So that's a very positive thought that they learn, that that's okay, it can be redone, anything can be redone in life.
And that is gold.
Yeah, that's so cool, right? Persistence in terms of doing things again. You were also saying, when we were like prepping back there, you just mentioned that you were getting your kids to kind of a bunch of kids in your family to play Street Fighter, and someone in your family was like you're teaching them violence immediately and stuff like that. So, do you get a lot of that when you play games? Do you get a lot of that in the family in terms of what kind of things that?
When I play games, yeah, sometimes when I play games, the family stops like Dave from coming inside the room because they don't want his mom to see his mom slaying all these enemies and
They don't
like
want to see you doing
zombies
like a
and all
Mortal
that.
Kombat fatality.
Yes,
and stuff.
zombies
Yeah,
and
fair
all
enough.
that. Yeah, but I should say that I actively got him to like play a little bit of God of War, where
Yeah.
yeah, where he sees, because those are things which he's able to relate it to his real life, right? It's a
He's able to
relationship.
relate God of War to his real
No,
life.
it's a
What kind
relationship
of
between a
family
dad and
arrangement
his
do you guys have?
son.
Okay, you're talking
Father
A
about
dad
the
teaching him
relationship between the father and the
yeah,
son.
the
Yeah,
emotional things. He sees his dad teaching him some things. So when Karthik plays something, and when the kid is riding the boat, he wants like, hey, that's the son sailing the boat, right? Can I do that?
Right,
When you are playing.
right.
So he wants to take an active role in whatever we do, and he does it himself.
That's really interesting, right? Where they're trying to replicate the father-son relationship in game,
The
based on
bonding
what they have.
becomes
That's
stronger.
actually really cool.
Yeah, the bonding becomes stronger. And I actually tried making Dev and his cousin play Street Fighter, because in my thought, it is not a bloodshed or like a game which kids should not play. And they had a lot of fun. And for them, it's just cartoons who are fighting. Right? He never felt that it was violence or, oh, she punched me on my face or whatever. For him, it was a game. He had a lot of fun, and I saw them bonding more while playing that game than when they were when before I introduced it to them. Like before they used to fight, but now they took that fight very easily. They played Street Fighter, they took the fight very easily, and after they stopped playing also, the conflict resolution was very easier between them. They talked it out. This time I won, no, next time you will win. You will win. That's okay, don't worry. So all that companionship they got while playing that game. And as I mentioned to you earlier, there were like some elders in the family who said like, oh, don't play, make the kids play this game. It'll make them fight. It'll get that mental model of like, oh, we have to fight to them, which I did not see reflecting between them very clearly in real life, right?
Yeah.
So, but that is a very strong opinion and thought process which we have to get over.
Super interesting. That's really cool. Yeah, Projal, surely as a child of the video game generation, you have much to share.
I do, but maybe not as much in this respect, because even as a child, I was never that interested in the more violent games. I was a Disney kid, so I was always playing The Lion King and Aladdin and things like that.
Which
as
is
a kid.
basically like lions like killing hyenas and stuff, and that's not like violence.
Yes, that's not.
I don't
that's
think there was
animal
any killing
violence.
hyenas in the game though. It was mostly dodging platforming, right?
Yes, there wasn't killing. You could jump on hyenas and then they disappeared, but that's not killing. That happens all the
That's
time
fair.
in the wild.
Yeah. That's just people disappearing.
Yeah.
Like we know that they haven't been killed. They're just not around.
Not around.
So for me, the restrictions came about in the form of, as you said earlier, Pavithra, a waste of time, or the playing games isn't a productive use of your time, and so on. And I do remember going to various friends' houses, and they would show me things like GTA and occasionally God of War or some such thing, and they would always treat it as this secret illicit thing they're doing in their room that their parents can't see in
As illicit
outside.
things go, those aren't bad. Just saying.
They aren't bad, but that was
Perfectly all right illicit stuff.
yeah, but that was the stigma that games had for a long time, and like still have today. In fact, I can't imagine what it's like being a gamer parent or a child of a gamer parent. Like maybe there's a different set of struggles in that my parents only let me play these curated list of non-bad games or games that play well, and such. Not which is like the best games, God of War and whatnot, violent games, but not the games that they know don't have good gameplay.
Maybe my son is like too young to know that I can play all these other games. So maybe when he grows up, he might want to play a new set of games.
I was just about to say,
Right?
maybe we'll find out in 20 years.
Yeah, maybe we'll find out
those
not even
games
20 years. In another 10 years, we'll find out what he wants to play. For now, I have installed games in my PlayStation what I want him to play, like Rocket League or FIFA or tennis or whatever.
But I have direct experience with that, right? Again, like when I was growing up, I did not really have to. My parents weren't the kind who even cared. They were like, sure, play what you want. You've got it figured out. So I didn't face that. I faced that narrative of games are bad for kids and are violent more as a parent than as a child. Never faced it much as a child. But as a parent who was allowing his child to play video games, I received a lot of resistance from family and friends and general society. Like, why are you doing this? And games are violent. You shouldn't be allowing. And also, having been a game journalist and a game developer in the era of Jack Thompson and all of those crazy times where people were like losing their mind about video games and video games were being scapegoated for a whole bunch of behaviors in society, I've been a part of that struggle. And I've understood like a couple of things, right? Games certainly can influence behavior. They certainly can, just like any other medium. No better, no worse, right? And that's what we're going to talk about later in the podcast. But it's true, they can. But is that a problem? Because what kind of games are you allowing your children to play? Like you said, right? It comes to what Projjal said and what you said. As a parent, I choose responsibly what I would allow my children to play and what media I would allow my children to consume. And this is true of anything. You wouldn't allow your child to watch adult movies or to read books that are meant for
Much older
adults. Right? You curate and regulate the content they consume without a blanket judgment of whether that content form is appropriate or not, which is the right and responsible way to go about. But we don't do that with games because parents don't understand games. So when books are treated in a particular way and films are treated in a particular way, there's no reason you can't treat games in the same way and look at it. Right, so you do know that there are healthy books, there are healthy, there's healthy cinema and television which you would allow your kids to consume. The same is true for games. It's no different. I had those rules with my son until the age of 16, 17, even now. Now he's 19. He's an adult, so he can play whatever he wants. But because I think the maximum age rating is 18 plus, right?
Yeah.
So I think pretty much now he can play whatever he wants. But even when he was 16, he would actually follow the rules that I set up for him because he knew that his parent knew what he was talking about, right? Because I would tell him, I had rules. I'd allow him to play Halo, but not Call of Duty because Halo was shooting aliens, fictionalized things. That was okay. Call of Duty was shooting other human beings. No. My son hasn't played a GTA game until now. He has not played Grand Theft Auto because I was just like, you can't play that because it's not appropriate. But you can play Halo, right? And I remember when he was little, right? I used to be playing Fallout, and he used to watch me play. And there would be certain situations I would just say, turn around, and you can't watch this. And he'd just very faithfully turn around. And then later he would even ask me, can I watch this? Should I turn around now? Preemptively, because he knew that some stuff was not okay for him, and he completely accepted that. So I think a lot comes down to, the parental knowledge of the medium and how parents can actually then, just like we do with books, just like we do with movies, guide children towards the content that's actually useful or helpful for them, right? Which brings me to the natural extension that if you accept that games can be a bad influence on kids, what you're fundamentally saying is games can be an influence on kids.
Right.
Which means they can also be a good influence on kids. If you can influence behavior at all, you can influence it in a bad way for sure. And I don't disagree. I do not disagree with the people that say that games can make kids violent. Sure, they can. The wrong kind of games can.
In fact, it could be argued that it's easier to make games influence kids in a bad way. The play patterns that do that are easier to make. But to have a good influence, it takes a bit more of active effort.
That's interesting, but I just say they're easier to make because of convention, not because they're fundamentally harder to make.
Because they've always been making games like that, and that's okay, because maybe the intended audience for that is not kids.
Yes.
But I think that's the point that he's trying to make, which is that there are a lot of places that are intentionally making games for kids that can positively influence their behavior, and it is up to the parents to become more knowledgeable about it and perhaps be part of that journey with the kids, just as much as they do with like books and movies, because that's a thing that parents do with kids, right? There's read along time at bedtime, there's let's watch movie night, and those lists are like specially curated for that. There's no reason why video games can't be that as well.
Yeah, and even from a production standpoint, right? I think what you're, I agree with what you're saying, but I think that it's easier not because it's fundamentally easier. It's just because there's so much content which is not made for kids. It's made for adults, and it's just there's genre conventions, there's thematic conventions, there's an existing market for things like that, which have sort of defined and given the pathways to make that kind of game. But I wouldn't even say that's necessarily true. When you dig a little deeper, you know that there's so many other kinds of games like strategy games and forex games, which while they have combat and battle and stuff, they're not explicitly violent games, which are like the action games or the beat 'em ups or the shooters. And there are sports games. There's a lot of games still which exist today that are entirely kid appropriate and entirely positive in terms of the behaviors, unless you're talking about FIFA and you're talking about like predatory transfer behavior and messing with players' careers and stuff, and that's a whole different can of worms which we're not going to get into.
That's a more recent one.
Yeah. But I do believe that it is possible, and we know that it's possible to make games that influence children in a positive way. So just coming down to that, right? One of the things that I want to talk about is if we could all share some experiences of, behavioral change in us and positive behavioral change in us that's been affected by games, or what have you learned from games? What kind of skills have you developed, or things that you've learned by playing different kinds of games? If anybody could kind of talk about that thing, and I just want to go into that aspect of our relationship with video games as players.
I mean, the one of the most basic things that Pavithra mentioned earlier was learning persistence, because the thing that video games are famous for is having fail states. You fail and you repeat until you get it right, which is something that a lot of other facets of life don't seem to be interested in instilling. It's always you learn and you get it right the first time, or in this one instance,
or even somebody else get it right, so learn from them, right? That's what we see in movies or books,
and that's such a
Aragon did it right and you need to do it that way without having to try the other ways and fail and learn.
Mm-hmm. And that is not a reflection of what real life is like, right? In real life, technically you get any number of chances to learn from mistakes, redo the same thing but in a different fashion, to hopefully hit success at some point. And I think that's what games do really well, which is simulate exactly that. Right? There is a certain way to do it, but it's okay if you fail. You could keep resetting the game until you get it right.
Yeah, or you decide that it isn't for you, which is
also perfectly fine. Exactly. Yeah. So I have a really interesting thing that happened when I was playing God of War. I want to say 2 or 3. I don't remember exactly which one. And I was an adult when I played this. But so there is one level where you have to you have to basically like get from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen, so the perspective in the game changes, and all you have in that scene is a box, and they don't tell you what to do with it, and you have to like hold the box and then either push it or pull it. And I was very new to video games when I started playing this one, and I was just like, oh, I'm not able to push it, and I'm not able to pull it. And then I realized that the plane was actually on a slope, so I had to figure out the quote unquote physics of it. And so obviously pushing is easier when you're going down the slope, sorry, pulling is easier when you go down the slope, and pushing is easier when you go up the slope. And all I had to do was like a little bit of trial and error, and I figured that out. But it was the minute I realized what was happening on screen, that was a really cool moment for me, where I was like, if only I had this when I was, I don't know, in 7th grade or 8th grade, and I just had to play that one scene, I would have understood like weight, mass, inertia, movement, just so much more intuitively than just learning that from
Yeah,
like an equation, or having my teacher kind of lecture at me. That was a really cool moment for me, where I was like, okay, so that's what video games, like, that's the magic behind it, right?
Yeah, and physics is a classic example, right? Games just do physics really well,
So
and
well,
there's
yeah.
there's no better way to kind of experiment with all the concepts in physics than just play some kind of physics-based video game.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I remember while I was playing Shadow of the Colossus, and my son was very little then. He was like 3.5, 4 or something, and he was like very quietly looking at me playing the whole game, and he was just giving me hints. Mom, see, there's someone coming there, or like something is on our way and all that. And there was this very like one instance where I was fighting this one of the colossus, and there was a scene when the colossus bends to see you through the building, and that is a place where you'll have to climb, like hold his beard and climb on top of him to kill him, right? So I tried it like multiple times. I saw him bending, but I had like absolutely no clue that okay, I'll have to like use this as an opportunity to get hold of him. But there was my son who was sitting there and like quietly watching it, and looks like he already saw his dad playing that. Okay, so for like 2 3 times he was looking at me doing that, and then the fourth time he said, Mom, he's bending, hold his beard and go up. That is how you go on top of him." And I was like completely shocked to see that he could remember so much of like what he has seen already, right? It is a repetition of that thing, and he could very clearly like understand the surrounding and replicate, like remind himself about what was happening, and to tell me that that's how you do it, which is too much observation of the universe, which we generally don't do around us.
Yeah, it's the beauty of playing video games with kids, right? I remember playing Baba Is You with my 8-year-old nephew Arav, and my son Dhruv. And when Dhruv was little, I used to play Halo with him, and they'd always come up with solutions that I couldn't see because the adult mind has got preconceived notions.
Right.
But the child is just looking at what's there and
Yeah.
solving the problem from there. And games like Baba Is You, it's just such an incredibly well designed puzzle system that it works so beautifully for the child's beginner's mind, like they say in Zen, whether there's no preconceived idea of what it should work like. They just look at the rules, they just figure it out, and they just solve it. And usually kids are better at these kind of games and those kind of solutions than adults are. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I'd like to bring up an example in Undertale, which is a fantastic game where you can play in multiple different ways, and it was really the first. It was the first game to popularize the idea that you don't have to kill your enemies in an RPG, and so there were you could either play the game in the traditional RPG route where you attacked everyone, or you could play it in a more adventure gamey route, in which case it was more like a puzzle game where you had to figure out the thing to do where you didn't kill the enemy.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in the game that told you that this was an option. You did it, and once you saw the reward of not killing someone for yourself, it influenced you to do that more, just because the uniqueness of not killing an enemy rewarded you with a conversation, or like it unlocked some interactions down the road, as opposed to killing, which always resulted in the uniform disintegrating of the enemy. So without actually telling you that there's these things that you can do, it encourages you to experiment, and encourages you to go deeper, because there are now also different ways in which you can choose to not kill your enemies, which results in different outcomes to the battle. So much experimentation, and so much experimentation is encouraged by the simple trial error reward mechanic of Undertale. It gets you to turn what could have been just a standard killing and leveling up RPG into an actual city exploration and friend making simulator, so to
Yeah,
speak.
which is, I mean, Undertale is interesting that you bring up Undertale, because in Undertale, I think it was a classic example of how it's about the game mechanics are pushing you in a direction where it might still be actually the rational thing to do to just kill every enemy and kind of fight through and get those rewards, but it just felt better to not do that. It felt better because, I mean, without getting into the end game of Undertale, which has different implications for and there are people in this room who'd kill me if I spoil it any more than this, but there were certain things in Undertale which you would do things because they felt better, not because that was an optimal or a rational thing to do in terms of the pure gameplay mechanics, but because that felt like it was the right thing to do. And that's really profound, right? And I just want to kind of segue into that part of the conversation where I want to talk about like emotional stimulation and sandboxes, right? I remember one of my first experiences in experimenting with emotion was in the original Fallout, which many of our listeners may not even remember, or may have been, I don't know if they were born at the time when the game was released.
Yeah, there were Fallouts before Fallout 3, in case people didn't know.
I mean, which is obvious because it was Fallout 3, which, unless you're Rakesh Roshan, implies that there was a Fallout 1 and a Fallout 2. So, because, so in the original Fallout, there was Fallout was one of those original CRPGs which actually really let you do all kinds of things. You know, the games which kind of say play however you want, and most of the time that's a lie. But with Fallout, it was actually true. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to try this. I'm just going to try shooting a random NPC. And I was walking around outside this town, and there was this farmer who was just like tending to his crops. And I said, I'm just going to shoot him in the kneecaps just to see what happens, right? And immediately the NPC drops to his knees and say, I'm sorry, I have children, please. And I just stopped.
That can do it.
Yeah, I stopped dead in my tracks. And I said, I can't do this. And I reloaded the previous game because I didn't want to live with the consequences of that decision. That's the power of video games. It told me something about myself in terms of, at the time, and I was much younger at the time. And so I just wanted to, I wasn't like, I was much less comfortable with ambiguity, right? Moral ambiguity or a mature way of doing things where I looked at it and I was immediately horrified. And I was like, I'm going to stop. I can't do this. And it told me something about myself, which is interesting because, and after that, I would only play role-playing games as the hero do-gooder archetype for several years. Even before I could even bring myself to try a more evil approach or a more neutral approach, which I can do now because I just became my worldview about evil and good and bad and black and white itself kind of changed as I get older, right? And I understand or have a larger tolerance for ambiguity and less judgmental things of this is right and that's wrong. And that reflects in the way that I can play a video game today. And that's actually really interesting, right? Because video games, the video games are a sandbox where I can go and try things, which then tell me things about myself, which I can then validate in the real world and go back and try in video games. And that's super interesting in terms of like video games acting as moral sandboxes. And anybody who plays role-playing games knows that, right? The choices you can make in games like The Witcher, it's not easy. Or games, even in the older games, like a Chrono Trigger or something, which wasn't giving you clear binary choices of this is good and that's bad. But you got to take a call. And you got to decide what you want to do. And those kind of dilemmas can be super compelling and super interesting and really instructional in what they can tell you about your own view of the world and cause and effect and action and consequence.
And in your, to be fair, some of the games in the middle, like some of the Mass Effects and some of the Fallouts in the middle, they the evil route did tend to have some comically evil options that you would never take. Even it put you in the role of playing a hero, and then
save the 100 villagers or murder the puppies.
Yeah. So clearly, the evil route wouldn't be teaching you what not to do because you would never think to do those things anyway. But at the same time, you were still asking yourself, would I do the good route thing in real life? Because that's usually quite. It was always a very noble and selfless thing, and in fact, if you did only good actions, you became this almost comically good messiah by the end of the game. But at the same time, would you as a person in real life do those kinds of actions? Is something that you started asking yourself in real life as you played through
And when you
these
play
games?
multiple of these games, right, like each of them puts you in such different positions, right? Just like just approaching the problem from different places. So just riffing off of your Undertale example is the example that I like to tell, which is from The Last of Us 2, where again, spoilers, it's not a very old game, it's only a year and a half, but go ahead and talk
Go
about
ahead.
it
I
anyway.
mean, I don't have problem.
La 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 la.
So in that there is a spot where you're confronted by these dogs, and when that scene first plays out, you think that they're rabid dogs. Turns out maybe they are, but the point is that like that they're dogs and they're attacking you. And I think you're forced to kill the first one. I think for them to kind of demo the mechanic of how that works, but eventually, and I didn't realize that, but I think you can finish that part of the story by not killing the dogs, by just playing it on stealth mode. But I went and like basically wreaked havoc across every dog that I could find.
You just like slaughtered
I
all the
slaughtered all the
puppies.
dogs, which in
Oh
real
my
life I
God,
wouldn't
you're a
do,
horrible
right?
person.
Yeah,
Right?
who
In-
needs stealth when you have dogs to kill?
Yeah.
In real life, I obviously would never do that, and I did end up having a little bit of a raging argument with my friend who I was playing the game with, where he was like, "Why would you do that?" And I was like, "I mean, they're there, and they would kill me if I don't kill them." And he was like, "Did you even consider stealthing?" And I was like, "Stealth is really difficult," and I think that's a great kind of like allegory for what real life is like. Doing
Stealth is difficult.
no, doing the right thing is difficult. It
That's
does
true.
come with a higher cost. And that cost could be emotional, it could be like physical or apparent or not apparent immediately. Either way, it is harder to like quote unquote do the right thing, but it pays off obviously much better than if you do the really horrible thing like kill all the dogs, because at the end of that conversation I actually felt horrible about myself, and they weren't even real dogs, they were video game dogs.
Yeah.
Like you said, they were just pixels, right?
Yeah.
But I felt really bad about that. So like talking about emotional experiences, that will stick with me forever. I'm not saying I learned that you shouldn't kill dogs, I'm just saying that I think that moment kind of struck home even harder how emotional video games can be and how those experiences can stay with you for a really long time.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that you definitely did not learn not to kill dogs.
You know.
I mean, I'll believe it when I see it. Like as long if you do not slaughter 100 dogs in the next 6 months, I'm gonna believe you. But otherwise, you
I'm
know,
glad I'm gonna win this one.
Yeah. but it's what you said, right? It's not even. I didn't learn not to kill dogs or kill dogs. That's not the point. But you did learn something about yourself, and
Yeah.
you did have a conversation starter that would put down, give you some insight into your own moral compass.
Yeah, I think
right?
what I learned in that moment was that in dire situations like an apocalypse, like a zombie apocalypse,
Which
and
we
I-
all know is gonna
which
happen in the
we
next
all
10 years.
know- which we all know could very well happen, yes. But I think the point is that in dire situations, I think I found out about myself that I would rather do the easier thing than the right thing, and that did not feel good. It really didn't. Now,
Yeah.
thankfully, we might not have to face a zombie apocalypse, but I do think that games like these can put you in spaces where even as an adult, where you think you know who you are and you think you know what kinds of decisions you will make. I think games make you question that a little bit and be like, maybe not. I need to be better.
Doing
Yeah.
the right thing doesn't have to be as life threatening as that to apply those lessons. Doing the right thing can be as simple as not putting violent game mechanics in your games. It's
Yep.
difficult, but
If your intended audience
yeah.
is, if you are not okay exposing them to violent mechanics,
Or
then
if
yes,
you don't
absolutely.
believe in the idea of violence to resolve
all.
conflict, right?
Correct, yeah, exactly.
And there's just so much more. It's just like any other art form. You express what a set of beliefs that you believe in, and which kind of brings us to like what are the kind of things that we're looking to believe, or what are we kind of looking to do with the games that we make, like take these role-playing mechanics and these kind of conflicts and dilemmas that we believe that games are good at doing, and make kids and parents reflect on that and think about that, and it at least provides a talking point and a way to test or experiment and play with behaviors in a sandbox like role-playing games do, right? which we were talking about that earlier. And I wish we recorded that prep that we did just before the podcast, because I thought that was pretty cool. But where we spoke about, nobody argues that you cannot learn fundamental values and a moral or an ethical code and ways of behaving from books or from cinema. We all do. Most of us, in fact, learnt a lot of that from those sources, right? When you read those books, when you read fairy tales as you were kid, or hero stories, or from the parables or the myths, where there are these gods and they do the right thing and they protect the weak, and they tell the truth or they tell lies in order to get something good done or whatever, right? It's a bunch of stuff that we're learning from those kinds of mediums. And the other thing that we do is we learn from real life, where you just go and you do something, and then you get something nice out of that, or then everybody hates you, or people give you advice, or you feel bad about it, you feel great about it, and then you kind of learn what you want to do more of and what you want to do less of. And I believe that video games can kind of like maybe bridge that gap between the entirely non-interactive expositional way of talking about values to the real life thing of being able to experiment in those and try out things without the cost of you actually losing all your friends or getting punched in the face.
So you don't have to be an ostracized person rejected by society sitting in a cave before you go, oh, now I know.
And if you are, you can like reload and try again.
Exactly. But that's the thing, right? And I've said this multiple times after playing our games, but I'm just gonna say it again. Sometimes when I'm playing our game, like especially with a specific one called Sleepover Situation, I'm really scared to make those decisions, and I know that like the consequence is low because it's a video game. But I find it really hard sometimes to make those decisions because I'm like, this is too close to, like, this could happen to me, and I need to make the right decision now because it's important to me how I feel when I make that decision.
Yeah, playtesting our game can be really hard emotionally.
It is. I remember the kids in the playtests were like full of like, hey, this is what, like, it's really like what happens in real life. And one of the kids actually said, this is like practice for real life. And I'm like, man, that's heavy. That's not what we were going for.
I mean, while playtesting, I have to get to this ending, and to do that, I have to do make the crappiest decisions possible and live with that just so I can see whether the ending worked or not. And if it didn't work, well, I have to do it again.
You were going to say something though, you put your hand up.
That was something relevant to something 5 minutes ago. I don't remember anymore.
If it's not relevant anymore, we're gonna skip it.
Right.
So yeah, but it's interesting, right? Where we kind of come back to what's really interesting about like where we believe that games can go and what we believe that games can do is we believe that games can potentially be like really powerful way to kind of teach kids about behaviors, action and consequence, taking responsibility for your decisions. And because we know games do that, you take a decision, and if Peter Molyneux has his way, an entire village dies because you planted an acorn in the wrong place or something. But there are like a lot of things that we see in games, in games that are not meant for kids, right? In role-playing games or strategy games, where decisions that you take can have like far-reaching consequences on characters and on worlds, and that can then tell you how that feels, and this feels wrong, or this feels, I feel great that I because we all know like Bhavna's example or other examples that we've given, that we can really empathize with a bunch of pixels. We really can, because we can empathize with words on a page, or like frames on a video screen. We can empathize with things that aren't real, and that's not different with video games. And then, unlike those other mediums, video games give you the action agency. Video games give you a way to impact that consequence and what happens to those bunch of pixels that you're empathizing with. If that's a dog or your family or some enemies or some NPCs who need help.
Or a robot horse.
Or a robot horse, yeah.
Like
or a
in
robot
Horizon Zero
horse.
Dawn.
Yeah. That robot horse was really cool. And yeah, I know that Pavithra is looking forward to Forbidden West. And
Totally.
Yeah, we need to upgrade our hardware, man. But it's that, right? And Horizon Zero Dawn was a fantastic example of that, right? You actually had relationships with machines,
Yes.
and either a bad relationship, I want to kill that machine, or good relationships like this is my
My
machine, it's
machine.
my
Yeah, it's
horse,
my
and
friend. Yeah.
it's really really interesting, right? So all kinds of stuff. And games give you the thing of try this, try that, try that. In a Lord of the Rings, I can't choose. What if I had done this, or what if I had done that, and what would happen? And games are really valuable in providing a way for children to be able to try different things and look at those outcomes and have conversations. Like you said, you were talking about your friend, like, why did you kill the dogs? And that's an opportunity. I see that as a really strong opportunity in making video games, where we can make stuff that sparks those conversations that children can have with each other, with a parent, with a teacher, and talk about the ethical and moral issues that are being addressed by the game. And I think that's really powerful, and that's what we all know that we're going after, and hopefully that we can make games which enable that or facilitate that kind of learning and transference for kids to explore those situations and behaviors.
Yeah, it's like you said, we're not standing on the shoulders of giants here. We know games are capable of doing all these things. We are just trying to point it out and make it more, make that the focus of the game rather than a byproduct.
Yeah. If you can do it for adults, why not do it for kids?
Yeah. Have you met kids? They're very impressionable.
Have you met kids? They're actually much smarter and wiser than we think they are. So it's been like absolutely fascinating, right? Play testing these games with kids and kind of looking at what they say. They're
Yeah.
like, hit me with harder situations, right? And
Yeah.
almost always it's been like, this is too simple, or that's obvious, and they want more challenge. They want more
They
nuance.
would rather solve like world peace than talk about who sits next to who at lunch, and that was, I mean, it was a good surprise, but a surprise nonetheless when we heard that from a bunch of kids, right? I mean, I want to do big things.
Which is funny. I mean, that's also the trajectory of like kids media versus grown-up media. You'll have a kids show about saving the world every week, pretty much, whereas a grown-up show will be about, I don't know, sharing dinner, and that is an entire episode.
Yeah, I remember when we went for one of those playtests and you were explaining about what the game was and how it will impact the kids' decision making. And she was like quietly listening to you for like 2 minutes, like waiting for you to finish all that explanation of the game. And she just looked at you and she said, "Okay, is this like a personality test?" And I was like shocked. Oh no! Like kids can like the relationship which they form with like very simple sentences or like very simple explanations what we tell them, and their level of relation, like mental relationship they make to different things is like very strong,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, we're almost running out of time, folks. So, what I want to do is like just go around the room once and any words for, parents or educators who may be listening in to, what might be possible and how can they use video games to positively help their children develop, skills or learning.
So I would say, kids are playing video games already anyway. Um, and I understand that there is some anxiety or some worry around what kids are exposed to, especially considering that they have access to all of this information. But you can be part of that journey by just sort of like finding out what games are out there that obviously will be fun for kids to play, but also will be something that they can learn from. And this information is like perennially available on the internet. There are companies that are specifically making games for kids where they can learn like skills, they can like learn math, science, whatever, but they can actually learn like real life skills. Join your kids on that journey, and I promise you that you will not regret it.
Yeah, play games. I mean, this is advice that we're having to give out less and less because a lot more people are playing games nowadays than they used to. But yeah, just play more games and be more mindful of the content that's out there. Even if you don't have the time to play games, watch playthroughs of games. There are plenty of them on the internet. And the moment you are watching a playthrough and you find yourself disagreeing with what that person is doing, you're invested. It's as good almost as playing it yourself. For
I would just say, just have fun, play with your kids. They are not going to be kids for a long time. So before you realize, they'll be better companions for your game than just your kids. So, and that will also trigger a lot of communication between you and your kids, right? So that's a very strong relationship to build.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say for me, it's trust your children. Just trust them. Don't go in with an area of, an attitude of mistrust. Children are playing games. They know what they're doing. They're playing games for a reason. And all those reasons, most of those reasons are positive. Games help them make friends. They help them learn stuff. They help them build skills. That's the reason the children are playing games. If you go in with an attitude of openness and trust and talk to your kids and engage with them and their video games, that will pay you back in spades. If you go in with mistrust, they're only going to push you away, and that's only going to make things worse. So I would say trust your kids and trust games. The way you trust books and the way you trust movies, trust games. It's just the same. You just need to have a relationship with games the same way that you have a relationship with books, for instance. Right? And nobody's ever going to say books are bad for kids. Some books are bad for kids. Sure they are. But no one will ever say books are bad for kids. You need to be in that same space.
the people who would say that kind of thing usually ended up having book-based bonfires by the end of it.
It's easier that luckily we're moving to digital distribution, so it's hard to have digital bonfires of burning like bunches of code somewhere in the cloud. So God bless like Steam and the App Store.
Amazon Kindle. Never mind. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, you have a whole bonfire of Nintendo Switches and stuff like that. That would be cool. I mean, it's not that it's not happened. It happened with the Atari landfill
Right.
and stuff. It's happened before. But telling back, we really do think that games are just as good or as bad as books are. And if you have that kind of relationship with games, or you take the trouble to develop the kind of relationship with games, it's going to pay you back just as the way as books do, and possibly, in my view, even more, because games can be so powerful in allowing kids to engage in the worlds that we build and take away really important lessons in terms of cause and effect and consequence and responsibility and making choices. So that's great. So thank you very much, folks, for spending the time to come in and give us your views. And thank you, folks, for, if I were an old-time radio DJ, I'd say tuning in. But I don't know what the word is now. I don't know, clicking on that button or whatever. But we really, really appreciate you guys coming in and listening to us. Please feel free to pop us on some feedback, say what you'd like to listen to, whether you agree, disagree, and we'd be happy to continue engaging through the podcast, through other ways. We're Big Fat Phoenix Interactive. We really, really are keen on helping kids grow up the right way through video games, and we'd really appreciate for you to help us make that happen.
Yeah, we're all about inculcating good behaviors and not keeping away from bad practices. So remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and share on all social media platforms.
Now we got
We're
to
happy
build
to
that button into that. Thanks, Projjal. Thank you for feature creep as always. And as you know, at Big Fat Phoenix Interactive, we're also really, really serious about digressing and getting distracted by random things when talking about more important stuff. But hey, that's what we do. And thank you very much. And we'll see you whenever we record this the next time.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.